Diane Sterling had spent 15 years building one of the country's largest pharmaceutical distribution companies, and she believed strength should always be visible. Her assistants were sharp-tongued, her lawyers were aggressive. Her security, she believed, should look the part too, imposing, commanding, the kind of presence that made a room feel safer just by existing in it. Her personal bodyguard, Ethan Cole, was none of those things. He was quiet to the point of near invisibility, speaking only when necessary, standing 3 steps behind her at every event without a hint of the swagger she associated with real protection. He'd worked for her for 8 months, and in that time she couldn't recall him ever raising his voice, drawing attention to himself, or asserting authority the way she expected from someone paid to keep her safe. That morning, after a tense product recall meeting left her irritable and impatient, she decided she'd had enough. "You're too passive for this job," she told him flatly back in her office. "I need someone who commands a room, someone people are afraid to test." Ethan's expression didn't change. "Understood, ma'am, that's it." "No argument, would it change your decision?" She hesitated, thrown slightly by the calm in his voice. "No, then there's nothing to argue," he said simply, unclipping his access badge and setting it on her desk. "I hope the transition goes smoothly." There was no bitterness in his tone, no wounded pride, nothing Diane could point to and call unprofessional. If anything, his composure irritated her more than any argument would have. She watched him walk out of her office toward the elevator, quiet as always, carrying nothing but a small duffel bag he kept in the security break room. What she didn't know was that Ethan had spent 6 years in a classified Joint Special Operations Unit before leaving the service, trained specifically to avoid drawing attention. To observe before acting, to let threats reveal themselves before ever raising his own profile. Quiet wasn't a weakness, it was the entire discipline his old life had been built on. He'd taken the job with Sterling Pharmaceutical Distribution, wanting exactly what it offered: anonymity, structure, and distance from a world he'd promised himself he was done with. He hadn't planned on being fired for the very trait that had once kept him alive. That evening, Diane hosted a shareholder gala at the company's downtown headquarters, the kind of event with 300 guests, open bars, and enough visible wealth in the room to make security a formality rather than a priority. Her new head of security, a broad-shouldered man named Grant Wilkes, patrolled the room with exaggerated authority, greeting guests loudly, making his presence felt exactly the way Diane had wanted. Ethan hadn't been invited. He'd simply come to collect his final paperwork from the building's HR office, planning to be gone within 20 minutes. He was crossing the lobby toward the elevator when the front doors opened, and a man stepped through them that made every muscle in Ethan's body go instantly, quietly alert. Marcus Vale. Ethan hadn't seen that face in 6 years, not since the night a joint operation in Eastern Europe had gone catastrophically wrong. And half his unit had been left for dead by a contact who'd sold their position to the wrong buyer. Marcus had been that contact. Officially, he'd vanished afterward, presumed to have fled the country entirely. He was here now, dressed in an expensive tailored suit, moving through the gala's entrance like any other invited guest. 2 men trailing a careful half-step behind him, whose posture gave them away instantly to anyone trained to notice, hands positioned too close to their jackets. Eyes scanning exits instead of enjoying the party. Ethan's mind moved fast, cataloging everything at once. Marcus wasn't here for champagne. He was here for something in that ballroom worth far more. And Diane Sterling, unprotected by anything beyond a security chief who mistook volume for competence, had no idea the danger that had just walked through her own front door. He should have left. He'd been fired that morning, owed nothing to a woman who dismissed him for being exactly what had kept people alive for years. But he thought of the 300 guests inside, and the woman who, despite everything, had never actually been cruel, only wrong about what strength looked like. Ethan turned back toward the ballroom instead of the exit. Inside, Diane was mid-conversation with a group of investors when she spotted Ethan crossing the room toward her. His expression different than she'd ever seen it, not urgent exactly, but sharpened. Focused in a way that made her stomach tighten before she understood why. "You're not supposed to be here," she said as he reached her. "There's a problem," he said quietly, positioning himself so his back faced the room's center, eyes tracking movement over her shoulder. "The man who just walked in with 2 associates, do you recognize him?" Diane glanced past him toward the entrance, frowning. "Marcus Vale, he's a private equity contact. Reached out last month about acquiring a controlling stake in the company." "He's not here for a stake," Ethan said. He's here because your recall crisis this morning tanked your stock enough to make a hostile buyout look attractive, and men like him don't negotiate buyouts. They force them. That's absurd, Diane said, though something in Ethan's calm certainty was already unsettling the confidence in her voice. 6 years ago, that man sold out an entire operation for a payout from a buyer who wanted a weapons contract eliminated, Ethan said. People died because of the information he gave up. I'd know his face anywhere. Diane's expression shifted from irritation to genuine alarm. You're telling me a war criminal just walked into my gala. I'm telling you he's dangerous, calculated, and not alone, Ethan said. And your current head of security has no idea what he's looking at. Across the room, Grant Wilkes approached Marcus with his usual booming confidence, extending a hand in greeting. Entirely unaware of the two men flanking him, whose eyes had already located every exit in the ballroom. We need to get you out of here, Ethan said. I'm not running from my own building, Diane said, old stubbornness flaring even through her fear. Then stay close and do exactly what I tell you, Ethan said. Starting now, 15 seconds passed as Ethan guided Diane calmly toward a side alcove near the emergency exit, never breaking stride, never drawing attention. Behind them, Marcus finally located Diane across the room, his expression shifting from polite guest to something colder the instant he registered she was no longer standing where she'd been. She's moving, he murmured to the man beside him. Cut her off. The two associates split calmly through the crowd, and Grant Wilkes, sensing something wrong but misreading its shape entirely, moved to intercept them head-on, shouting for them to stop. One associate struck him hard across the jaw before he could react, dropping him to the marble floor as several guests screamed and scattered. The ballroom dissolved into chaos, guests surging toward exits, glasses shattering underfoot. Ethan pulled Diane behind a thick support pillar as the first associate raised a compact pistol, sweeping it toward the fleeing crowd. Stay down, Ethan told her before moving. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. He crossed the distance in 3 fast steps, caught the gunman's wrist before the shot could level, twisted the weapon skyward as it fired harmlessly into the ceiling, and drove him back into a serving table hard enough to end the fight in one motion. The second associate turned toward the sound, raising his own weapon, only for Ethan to already be moving toward him, closing the gap before the man could aim. Disarming him with the same economical efficiency, sweeping his legs out from under him and pinning him against the floor. Marcus watched from across the room, his earlier confidence collapsing into recognition. Cole, he said slowly, you're supposed to be dead. Funny, Ethan said, standing slowly. I was about to say the same about you. Marcus reached for something inside his jacket. But security officers responding to the earlier gunshot poured through the ballroom's entrance before he could finish the motion, weapons raised, quickly surrounding him. Within moments, all 3 men were restrained, weapons cleared, and the ballroom's chaos began settling into stunned, shaking silence. Diane emerged from behind the pillar, staring at Ethan as though seeing him for the first time. You said you were too passive for this job, he said quietly, allowing himself the smallest, tired smile. I was wrong, she said, her voice unsteady. About all of it, police arrived within minutes, taking statements as paramedics checked on Grant Wilkes, who would recover with nothing worse than a bruised jaw and a newly humbled understanding of what real security actually looked like. Marcus Vale was taken into custody, along with both associates, formally connecting him at last to the operation he'd betrayed 6 years earlier, a case Ethan's former unit had never been able to close. Diane sat with Ethan in her office late that night, the gala's wreckage still being cleared 2 floors below. 6 years special operations, she said quietly. And I fired you for being quiet. Quiet kept 12 people alive tonight, Ethan said. Including you. I want you back, she said, not as security, as head of it. Full authority, no interference. Ethan considered it for a long moment. On one condition, name it. You stop confusing volume with strength, he said. The loudest person in the room is rarely the one keeping it safe. Diane nodded slowly, something in her understanding finally, fundamentally shifting. Agreed. Word of the gala incident spread quickly through the company, though Ethan declined every request for interviews. Every offer to be publicly recognized, as the reason 300 people walked out of that ballroom unharmed. He returned to his post the following Monday exactly as he always had, 3 steps behind Diane. Quiet, watchful, entirely unremarkable to anyone who didn't know better. Diane never mistook his silence for weakness again. She'd built an empire believing that strength needed to be seen to be real, that command meant volume, that safety meant someone who made his presence known. It had taken one catastrophic night to teach her otherwise, that the steadiest people rarely announce themselves. That true competence often looks like nothing at all until the exact moment it matters, and that the quietest person in the room is sometimes the only reason everyone else gets to go home.